Welcome to yet another episode of the NewSpace India podcast. And today we have Dr. Ranjana Kaul, who's come to Kerala to the Space Conclave here, all the way from Delhi. And she is a good friend of mine for a long time, and we have had a lot of conversations on space policy and law, and how companies can grow in India and how we can make India into a very big space power, which is inclusive of everyone here. So in this episode of the NewSpace India podcast, let's talk about a little bit more about the current affairs in space policy in India, and the draft legislation, the space policy, and how it affects entrepreneurs and why we need it, and so on. So to begin with, just describe what is the difference between a law and a policy with respect to space, and what do we have today?
So, irrespective of space, the difference between law and policy is this, that the law is something which is the inspiration or the driving force of which is the government. And it imagines and sets out its objectives for the sector, let's say space. And it says that, all right, this is going to be my trajectory for the next 20 years, 30, depending on the sector. So space is a long term, it ought to be. And this is what India should achieve. Now, if that is my goal, and I'm standing here 20 years before that goal, what are the building blocks that my country needs to have to be enabled to be able to achieve those goals? And so it is obviously a gamut of skills, training, human resource, what is the logistics that it needs, does it need factories, does it need any special kind of education that will enable that post to be skilled for the purpose. All of these, finance, all of these and many more things will go into the building of the roadmap. Now, once you've got a roadmap, which is a policy, ideally, you should have a roadmap on implementing that policy. How am I going to do it? Now, we've got that together. Clearly, it must be regulated. What are the kinds of regulations such that they're user-friendly and they're balanced? Balanced such that government can keep control and exercise that control as and how required. There is a monitoring of that activity without getting insidious and penalties of the kind that scare people away and they're not going to come, and have a regulation that actually does not distort market. These are the principles and more, again, which will make that policy. The regulations are the outcome of that policy, and that regulation, for it to give an actionable right to the individual or the entity that is going to be engaged in this, is the law. And this is made by the parliament. That is the difference.
So when you talk about space policy, for example, in India, let's talk a little bit about the history of space policy in India itself. So give us a brief history of what was the first bits of policy in India that was formed which was related to space, and how it has taken shape over the last 10 or 20 years now.
So look, I don't think there was a policy because the central government never did write a policy. But because the Department of Space is the department who is charged with the responsibility of structuring, creating and generating our space program, they have a mandate which is given under the allocation of business rules. Up until the time that India was a command economy, nobody really knew anything about Space Department, what it was doing, and it was busy doing its national missions and whatever was the requirement of the government or it had decided. It is only when there was partial deregulation that too after some time had rolled in specific context to the telecom sector, that in 1999 there was a revision, amendment to you had the new telecom policy, in which one paragraph said that satellite telecommunication will be enabled, and that thereafter the ISRO, our Department of Space, issued a set of guidelines on how that would be enabled. And they said that private satellite systems will be permitted. All these were guidelines issued by the department. That is what we construe as our satellite communications policy, which in fact it is not. They also straight away around that time, in the foreign direct investment policy, said that 74% foreign direct investment would be allowed in setting up private satellite systems. Nobody was ever given a license. I do not know the reason. I have asked. I have got multiple replies. So somewhere in between this is the truth. The short point is that nobody was given a license. But the KN, the KU band and so on, that is where this whole story of INSAT started. There was also the notion that at this point in time, we don't have enough INSAT, so let us borrow transponders until such time as we have enough INSATs. That moment has never come. And admittedly, there are 85% of our transponders are serviced on foreign satellites. Then you had Google Earth entering our lives. And consequently, you had the government of India saying that we've got also spatial information. Otherwise, all of us were used to the Survey of India. And the atlases that we all had, if you'll remember, it says Survey of India. Right? So now you had the story of maps and of images, and they would not allow, you could get it on Google on tap, in an anmati, you could do what you want with it, but the government of India was not minded to make it available to its citizens, even though it was available for export. Somebody outside could take it. As we went along, we got GPS in our lives, so then came the Gagan, first and foremost, the geo-augmentation satellite, which took the longest time for it to get commissioned. Not because the space department sort of slept on the wheel, but it was the aviation. That ministry was simply not getting up to speed. The Department of Space had got a job done, all up and ready. But for it to be utilized was a different matter. And then you got the IRNSS. So this is how gradually we were introduced to our own assets in these. But we as yet do not have a policy on satellite navigation. We are aware that some part will be strategic and some will be commercial and some will be perhaps open use. But what is the percentage and how are we going to do it, we don't know as yet. The map policy, well, we've had one that was Survey of India policy, then we have one which is a notification issued by the Government of India back in 62 or so to say that we cannot export maps. And then you have the spatial satellite image, that policy. And the long and short of the story is that it is difficult to access India's own map repositories. It is very, very difficult and people just simply prefer to go to Google or some other source. Why we are not able to do it, I do not know. The Bhuvan is so tedious, you have to be a member, or registered on it, you have to be either a government entity or doing a project connected with government or in some manner connected to government. I don't know, maybe the citizens are a security threat. They will do something with this which they ought not to be doing. I really don't know what the reason is. And then you have telecommunications. You have now a digital communication policy in place. But the Ministry of Telecom, the Department of Telecom has to put its regulations in place. If that does not happen, you have young people coming, I'm personally advising a couple of them, who have come with incredible technology. It's a convergence technology. But I don't know how to advise him on whether he can or cannot manufacture the product here in India. And you have this enormous program which says Make in India. So the dots are not connected, and that is the tragedy. That is where we are today. We still don't have a national space policy.
What are the main facets of a national space policy that can, create everything as a foundation for many of these people to be successful?
Look, first and foremost is for government to reach the conclusion that there is a nascent and growing new space set of companies that has arisen suo moto. Nobody's helped them to do it, they've just done it. And why have they done it? because this talent and this educated pool of people happen to be here in India, and they're Indians coming out of our universities. The principal one is here in Trivandrum, the Indian Institute of Space Science and Technology, which was promoted by the Department of Space itself. But where you have a situation that the rate of attrition, let's say, in the Department of Space is not as much, or there aren't that many vacancies. There are young people, educated, highly primed to those sectors who are coming out. They need the jobs. And so while many must have got jobs in big companies, others just simply said that, no, we've got to do this on our own. How can it be possible at all? I'm absolutely baffled. How can it be possible that after 10 years of all of you, and you're amongst the earliest one, NP, that government does not feel that this is the driver for the economy? The entire world has reached this conclusion. You people are being wooed by every country other than your own. And many of you, including yourself, have packed your bags and gone there. But your heart lies here and you're back here every now and then. It must tell you some story. That's the way.
So because of the lack of regulations, as you rightly pointed out, say for example, when you mentioned considering the bandwidth itself, say for example, this is defined as used for strategic purposes, and this could be licensed and used for your own technology itself. So just because of the lack of that, how much of the output that could be possibly delivered is obstructed in your opinion? I mean, how much of a change are we talking about?
I can't give you numbers, but the fact that you have the IRNSs up and running, and its signals, I think, are working, and they're doing some testing. And they may be testing, but it is not the case that if I announce it today, that tomorrow you will be up and running with your business. It takes time. Just as much as it's taking government time to test it and be sure that all those signals are fine and they're working out how and how much to allow for free and how much for civil use and so on and so forth, you have to give some policy indication to the economy, to the participants of economy. Economy is not an abstract. It contains humans who are engaged in economic activity. That is the thing. You have, for example, this whole GPS enabled. Look at the difference in the logistics sector today. Trucks all have these trackers, and now you know where your truck is and how long it's going to take. It's cut down the time reaching the ports. We want to use that same signal for ourselves, right? Navigation, and then it has to be linked to our maps. Government wants to deliver you services online, government services, your birth certificate, your property taxes are being paid online, your income tax you pay online, all of these things. Does it not need the geographical location of the person who is to pay? The house number, the gully number, the name of the road, whatever it may be. You do. I don't know. I mean, Digital India is a brilliant program, but how will it all come together if all the dots are not connected? All of this is predicated on people like you who are part of that new space. Somebody is doing artificial intelligence, somebody is wanting to build a satellite, somebody wants to bring the technology, somebody wants to do avionics. These are not bubbles existing by themselves in isolation. This is all together. The government must act on this. We need a policy.
So given your emphasis on the topic itself, it is very apparent that having regulations on such kind of space law itself is so much important. So this only goes to, this triggers a question in my mind. If it were that important, why do you think, I mean, I guess it's already too late now, guessing on what you're actually saying for India to actually begin creating new procedures and all that. Why do you think emphasis was not given on space law itself until now?
Look, I would not advocate a space law unless you have a space policy. And I'll tell you why this whole narrative of space law came about is because way back when I sort of entered into this and for the first time said anything at all, we said, well, we need a space law in India. What is that space law going to do? Well, firstly, you need private participation, and then it must have a license, and it must say what you can do, and it needs insurance and liability and third-party liability and so on, so forth, so forth, so forth. And everybody picked up on that narrative. and said you need a space law. That's the only way private sector can. Anyway, over the years, I have thought greatly about this whole thing. And I have reached the conclusion that first things first. What you need is a national space policy, and I mean a national space policy. Of course, the Space Commission and Department of Space and ISRO and other constituents will have to have a significant input to give. But the space policy and space sector does not operate in its own silo. It connects every aspect of life which is admitted. We keep saying space is in our life, from banking to whatever. Then you ask the bankers, you ask the school teachers, you ask the bus drivers, the DTC bus or whatever is your public transport, ask everybody, every department, every ministry that how do you use it? Because each has a unique requirement. And all those dots, when they are connected, then you will understand what is the space policy for the country and how should we escalate it, how should we grow it step by step till you reach that objective you need. That is it.
So normally, the countries that want to form space policy or, any sort of policies, there is always an exercise of collecting data and information, which you said.
Yes.
And that's the funny thing about India, I think, that there is no open data that is available that estimates the size of India's space economy.
No,
and
you're right.
The whole idea of how much space contributes to India's GDP, or even how much is invested in the space program, and what is the return to the citizen directly in terms of investment.
So, NP, in India, the concept of taxpayers' money this is a phrase that is lately entering into people's speech. It simply didn't exist. Consolidated Fund of India, full stop. Government ke khate se paise jayega. That it is your taxes and mine, nobody really actively thought about it. So it was not a situation of consumer awareness in that sense, right? Now the point is, how much has been spent on the space program, you will know from the Planning Commission and all of that. How it has been spent and what has been the leakages, if any, or the delays or whatever it is, all that also you will know. But for whatever it is that has been done, there will have to be some impact downstream, because of which some greater economic benefit accrued to the economy, maybe greater taxes or something like that. And in those verticals, I imagine if you mined old data on this, you might be able to get something. But starting from here, if you look at how did our economy change with GPS coming and location-based services coming into the market? Something has changed. How has our economy changed after internet was available to all of us? Something has changed. What happened after mobile phones came? How have people upgraded their economic prospects and their mobility and all of that? It would not be easy. You may not get absolutely clear and absolute term number data, but you will know the trends of how not only has it enhanced economy, or economic wherewithal of a family and individual, but also his lifestyle, his entire lifestyle and attitude to life. That is also required to be measured, because that is going to give you an indication of the felt need for the future. So it's possible to do that.
So I'm going to talk about some examples so that it's very concrete on different use cases. So in that, the audience can actually get a more improvised understanding of the kind of business. So I'm going to talk about a kind of business, and then you can talk about what are the policies that affect them and how it governs. So let's say case one, I am an entrepreneur who is planning to build satellites that carry cameras. So I can image parts of any part of the world and distribute this imagery. So if I am this entrepreneur trying to build such a satellite which is able to image, what are the policies that affect me, and do we have those in place in India?
So at this present point in time, private sector is not involved in any manner of space. And when I say space, I'm talking of 100 kilometers over, outer space. So we do not have any private satellites. We don't have telecommunication satellites. We definitely do not have remote sensing satellites. In fact, we don't have any. All of them are government owned. So if you want to build a satellite, you can build a satellite. I don't think that should be a problem per se. But now you want to build a satellite that's capable of imaging. That also you can build. Nobody's going to stop you. But can you put it up in space? That's another matter. Given the fact that space is not open to the private sector to conduct activities in outer space, under the Indian laws today, you can't do it from here.
So is there a prohibition that is written somewhere, or is it just ambiguity?
No, it just happens to exist. In India, the interpretation of law is that unless you can show me a law that tells you that you can do this, it means that you cannot do it.
Okay, so it's mostly the other way around from most countries.
No, what it is that in international law, the interpretation is that unless there's a specific prohibition, it means that you can do it.
Yeah.
In India, our courts interpret it differently. They say, show me the authority.
Okay. So that is one part of the business. Of course, what happens if, let's say, I have to acquire certain camera data or image data, and is there any policies that hold in place as for acquiring this data and processing it and distributing it?
Well, of course, the country has a map policy, and it has a spatial image distribution policy that indicates what is the resolution which is available, and you are required to go through the proper procedure to the national map, national remote sense. What is it called?
The remote sensing
remote
data policy.
Sensing data.
Yeah.
No. Remote sensing.
National map policy, is it?
Not the policy, but the entity that gives it to you. It's escaped me.
Oh,
the National Remote Sensing Center.
Yes.
So you have to make application there.
Yeah.
Like I said, that for you to get data, you have to give them all the details of it. You have to pay them in advance. They will vet it. And if you want it at a resolution better than what they're prepared to give it, then they may or may not give it. But it'll take you a very long time. I must tell you on this point that there was once a writ petition that had been filed by a company which was dealing in this location-based service and needed to access data from the National Remote Sensing Center. And they had made, and it's 6 months and 7 months. I mean, there is a cost, transaction cost, opportunity cost to business. Now, this is not something that any government entity at all factors in, because it's not its money. There's nothing like a rate of return here, right? The question that you asked me. And so they filed a writ. I happened to be in Bangalore, and I happened to meet a particular person who was directly involved with it. And I said, I just got a look at this text message. It says that there's a writ that's been filed. And he said, So it's also a attitude not only of this, but of the government in general, because it's a monolith. One individual is filing a case against the government, fine. The government has perpetual existence. You and I don't.
Yeah. So the third case, for example, is if I want to offer internet using space today over India, I build the satellite. I have to have access to the frequencies, and I have to have the access to also, have terminals on the ground to set up, to operate and then to coordinate, have gateways and things like that. So we have none of this also in place, right?
No. What you don't have in place just now is for you to be able to launch your private satellite.
Mm-hmm.
That is not allowed. But you want to offer internet? Sure. Go to Department of Telecom. You become an internet service provider. There are rules and regulations pertaining to that. You fulfill all those conditions, give them the details you want, and become an ISP.
No, but this is an ISP through satellites.
ISP through satellite, firstly, then you will have to tell ISRO to build you a satellite of this nature.
Yeah. But no, if somebody says I will build the...
No, but they will not allow the launch of that satellite.
Okay.
That particular kind of satellite, unless that policy, their satellite communication policy, unless that allows for internet through satellite, they will not let you launch it.
So, what happens to the companies in India who are planning to launch or have already launched satellites and
From India?
yeah, as in Indian companies, for example, Exceed Space launched its satellite
Well,
through
it's launched
SpaceX.
its satellite. It bought a share on the PSLV and it got launched. Now, what does it plan to do? What is the service it wants to offer?
Yeah.
I suppose that he must have got the regulations and permissions in place because he cannot give those services otherwise. The frequencies that land on India have to land here in India on the ground station, which is an approved ground station.
Yeah, so there's also the other bits of having the ability to export any services or anything there. So do we have any laws that allow people to even, let's say, if I cannot build a satellite and launch from here, or I'm not allowed to put.
I had once got a query from a very big mobile company to say that, look, we have asked for capacity. Now this is taking very long and we have no idea how long it will take for us to be. Can we ask X company in Europe to build this satellite for us? Because it takes 2 to 3 years to build a satellite of the kind they wanted. And the contract will say that if in the event that within those 3 years we get it, that money shall be returned and so on. I said, don't even think about doing it. Because this is the way in which we look at our law. If I have not told you that you can do it, it means that you cannot do it. So the other way of doing it is you please write a letter and say, can I do this? And you'll either not hear from them or they'll say no. So don't skate on thin ice.
Is there a need for a structural change in the way institutions are, put in place today to have everything set?
I believe that there has to be regulatory, procedural and institution all in sync with each other. These institutions cannot be made up of people who are not conversant and not comfortable, not confident. I mean, we are all humans. You never dealt with this. You were a little anxious about what it means and where it will take you. You need new institutions. You need people who are trained to be manning those institutions. And you need regulations that can be delivered in a balanced way. The aim of the exercise is that while government wants to earn revenue, it cannot earn revenue through taxes unless you allow me to get business that makes me pay more tax. So if you're going to, miss the trees for the woods, so to speak, then that's fine. I always say this about this 18% GST on launches for an Indian company to launch. You allow that Indian company launch, it is without the GST, it is going to earn wealth over here, it's going to pay you more tax. It goes into the consolidated fund. How can there be a myopic view to these matters? And you chase exports. What is commercialization? At the moment, it is all about exporting. Meaning launches for foreign entities, including our own who go outside and come back. But your own you will not allow. You will have a barrier.
Yeah. What about companies that want to build their own launch vehicles?
Good luck to them. I think the space program will be probably very happy that somebody is doing this, even though I'm sure, secretly they must think that, well, thank God, we've been wanting to do this, so here it is. I think it's a great development, and if we can't recognize these new developments, technological developments, and such incredible sort of work, we're doing ourselves a disservice.
So, are there any lessons for India? Because I don't know how many people take lessons from other countries, but are there any lessons?
They do. They travel a lot to other countries for study tours.
Yeah. So, are there any lessons that can drive change here, or who is the template that we could look at, or is there a template at all?
It is personality driven, and in my opinion, my sincere opinion, it doesn't matter which government it is. Only the Prime Minister can be the driver for space. Because other than the fact that, of course, he's the captain of the ship, the fact is that space is directly under his remit. And if there is somebody who can say that this whole ecosystem that has grown without any effort on our part, but enough effort to dissuade them, but they still press on. You have to take them on board. We have to have a national policy. Then there will be a national policy.
So interestingly, the sectors like telecom or airlines, or they all have a parallel here, right? Because you have a state entity that was operating almost exclusively, and then companies came up, and the state entity had to
Partial deregulation.
Yeah. So, what are the kind of momentums, or what were the key events you think are lessons that the space people can learn from the changes that were made in?
So the telecom companies, of course, there was a need. There was already that great C-Dot mission, which when Rajiv Gandhi was Prime Minister and Mr. Pitroda and all this sort of thing. So even Mrs. Gandhi was interested in technology. So there were early shoots, you might say, getting on, and it progressed to a point where actually there was partial deregulation and all these mobile phones came, and then satellite. I think that this trajectory, the satellite company, I mean, that market is not distorted, but the regulations came to be distorted for reasons which were not fair and justified for the others, and that has created today distortions in the market. And we are seeing what is happening with there's serious difficulties in the telecom sector, and some people actually are quite pessimistic, and they say they're on the precipice of a collapse. This is a sunshine area, but still, because we allowed those regulations to be skewed in favor of one or the other, same thing happened with the airlines. You partially deregulated, then you had some airlines, and when the no-frills airlines came, this new lot of industries, they said, no, you will have to put these conditions, those conditions, because they didn't want a competitor. Already the market is imbalanced because you have Air India and Indian Airlines. So whether it is flying the routes or whether it's doing ground handling, Air India will always be one out of the three, or stuff like that. These routes will be given only to the national carriers and not to, all of those things were happening. But now you had your incumbents, then the old airlines, then the new frill airlines. So you kept on skewering, and look at the condition of our airlines. They've gone down like 9 pits. I feel appalled actually at people who say that no, we should support them, because why? You're spoon feeding Air India on taxpayers' money. So you must support Kingfisher, you must support Jet. Why?
No, but what are the really lessons on deregulation for space, and how?
So deregulation for space, if we should ever want to learn lessons, is exactly this, that you have a policy for this sector, understand it, you have regulations, don't rush into a law, you have notified regulations, you get the regulator, you get the skilled people into it, and go step by step. And why do I say don't rush for law? Because a regulation, if it needs to be tweaked, can be tweaked with an amendment and a notification. A law, in any case, takes 5 to 8 to 10 years it has to go to a parliamentary committee, it has to be debated, all kinds of things have to be done. So do that carefully with the intention that if I've written this today, I have written it, and I'm absolutely convinced this is right, but if tomorrow NP comes and says, this is the difficulty that's causing it, I should be flexible to say, okay, fine, maybe we got it wrong this time, let's just amend it and see how it works for us. It's too sensitive, it's too tech-centric, and it's high risk and high investment sector. You can't take risks on it to the extent possible.
So who writes this regulatory, framework, or who becomes the regulator in the current setup?
No, you'll have to have a separate. You cannot. Our experience, India's experience is that the licensor, the regulator, and the dispute redressal forum has to be separate. This is our object lesson from telecom. You had DOT, which was the licensor, and it was your regulator. There were sheafs and sheafs of cases. I remember I was briefed in some of them. The first round of telecom cases where they said you cannot because there's a conflict of interest. You're favoring this one, that one, so on and so forth. So we got a new regulator. So that became the TRAI. Now TRAI is also listening to dispute. They said no, another round of cases. So we got the TD-SAT. And the appeal from TD-SAT, that's a dispute resolution presided by a judge of the Supreme Court, is to the Supreme Court. Our experience is we are not objective people. We are unable to function objectively.
So you have to see this evolution of possibly the same kind of...
You don't want this evolution. It wastes energy, it wastes money, it wastes the effort, and it is absolutely not fair on anybody. You can't take these small perspective and say, I like his face today, so let me just do this for him. No. Objectivity is the thumb rule here. So
for any of these changes to happen, currently the overwhelming body looking at all of this is the Space Commission.
Yes.
And below that is the Department of Space, and then the ISRO in there. And the current way the whole thing is structured is in a way that the Secretary of the Department of Space is also the chairman of the Space Commission, is also the chairman of ISRO. So it's almost as if I'm the boss who reports to the boss who I am, and then my boss is again me. So it's like three levels.
And then your boss thereafter is the Prime Minister.
Yeah. So that is something that needs to be then addressed.
Well, yes, it needs to be addressed. It does. Of course, now we also have people from the Finance Ministry and MEA and so on who are members of the Space Commission. But space, firstly, such a vital, it has gone through challenges, and the country has faced up. This ISRO has stood its ground, and it's taken it on the chin and got on with the job, and that's fantastic. I mean, we're all proud of it. But anything in this nature, whatever I'm saying, is not an attack on ISRO. Nobody's saying away with ISRO. We cannot do without ISRO. There's no question about it. But it should be taken in the spirit that is there a point we are missing over here? And therefore, the inputs have to be for the country, and not country today. It's a country for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years and beyond those 50 years. That's what you want. I'm saddened that this moment hasn't come as yet.
So in the larger context, do you think the public cares? Because normally, what happens is when institution, like for example, even NASA for that matter, right? When there was the peak of the Apollo era and astronauts were being sent and everything, the institution captures the public imagination, right? And in India's case, now the institution has caught the public imagination like never before. And so I guess, the public doesn't care enough.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. It's not concerned with it in their everyday life. How should be? Firstly, they will have to spend so much time to understand what the story is. Of course not. The public is not concerned. It is the government's job to be concerned.
Yeah, in some sense, I guess, that is one of the things that makes everything slow, I would say, right? Because, this public imagination, because, when you have to fly.
Yes, it becomes a political issue, it becomes an emotive issue, all of that.
Yeah. And even convenience, because, when you look at telecom or aviation or whatever other sectors, if I can't fly anywhere because there's not options anywhere, or if I can't get internet access or call someone, because, the state is the only provider and I'm in line to do things, that citizen is directly affected in that sense. So
this space is remote.
Yeah. And so the nature of space being, always hidden to the citizen directly, that makes it very hard for any grassroots level initiative to, get citizen support so efficiently.
Properly educated people also, when they were talking to me about space, when the Chandrayaan first went, then there was a counter narrative, but why do we need this? We have so much poverty, we have so much this. We all sitting in front of a television watching a TV show. So I said, then you switch this thing off, you won't have it. Why? It's because it's satellite telecommunication. He said, oh, is that so? But you don't think of it actively because it's just so far away. Yeah. You sign up with a company and you get your TV channel.
Yeah, I mean, it was fantastic because I was here in India during the time of the Chandrayaan 2 launch, and that was the only thing that I ever saw there, every news channel in the country running
Absolutely.
something on space,
Yes,
and the
absolutely.
public,
Yes,
staying up late in the night.
Yes, to watch it.
Yeah.
It's become very savvy and aware, I must tell you.
personally there at the launch site itself at 2 a.m.
And it was sort of a achievement to be able to say, I was there.
Exactly.
Yes,
And
we've
it
come
was-
a long way in public
It was
awareness.
very much surprising to see people of all age categories, and even people who are physically challenged were also there.
Yes, yes.
So that just goes to show how much love people actually.
The minute you see cartoon films for children, now with baby astronauts and all this, you know you've arrived.
So, what gives you hope, and what makes you despair, I guess.
This is what gives me hope is that I am generally a person with a positive attitude, and I do believe that this will happen. It has to happen. I want it to happen. Maybe that's why I believe it will happen. But I'm deeply disappointed that after everybody one meets and speaks to, all agree. Bureaucracy is brilliant and wonderful. What happens when they get into their offices, I cannot say. Every one of the people that you have invited, I have at different seminars, the important government, for every one of them has agreed. That's it.
I mean, with that bleak note, I would
It is bleak. It is a little bleak. And I feel sorrier because a large number of you and your friends who kept in touch with me, come and see me, have one after the other said, "Man, I'm going." And that is what saddens me most.
Yeah, I would imagine, the most companies will probably plan to have some sort of a, structure where they would just use India as a base for operations, or, just to create the foundation and use it for the manpower base and low cost nature, and have, foreign entities where.
Absolutely. So there will still be the backroom boys.
Yeah, I guess that's where, maybe also the e-commerce sector did in certain ways, where they moved headquarters to, I don't know, like to Singapore or some other place. So because of the lack of the government regulation in that sense.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
I think that might happen very much in space, and
Yes, it certainly looks like.
yeah, and maybe that's how is the natural transition of government realizing that it's losing on an opportunity.
Well, the old story of the Swami who got accolades in the United States and then he was accepted when he came back.